On a rainy day at school, a boy could be seen resting his head. In a deserted classroom, someone rested their head on a desk, absent-mindedly toying with an enchanting fish that seemed to have appeared through magical means. The boy quickly lifts his gaze from the desk as a classmate enters the room. Inside the classroom, a boy appeared startled by the newcomer's presence. He pointed out that this class was reserved for second-year students and questioned the stranger's identity. The newcomer simply gazed back in shock, unable to respond. The boy who had been resting his head on the desk was known as, while the one who had just entered was. The moment captured an awkward and tense introduction between the two. The scene shifts to an elegant apartment, where a fish glides through a spacious aquarium while a boy sleeps quietly in the background. The bedroom stood unchanged, even though 9 years had already slipped by. While he slept, he dreamed of someone reaching out and touching him. He suddenly awoke to the sound of his voice calling his name. He glanced over his shoulder and spotted asleep next to him. As awoke, he inquired about his companion's sleep and then began to speak. She informs him that he is behind schedule, attempts to ask for a little more time, yet successfully. The goal was to rouse him from sleep, and while he stood at the sink brushing his teeth, he spotted a red mark on his neck and questioned what could have bitten him. Had entered the world as a beta, and because of certain events he couldn't control, he now shared a home with his friend. He joins for breakfast, finding that has already. After preparing the meal, he sat down to eat, reflecting that it was the person who had come to his rescue was also the only friend he had ever known. Born into a wealthy family as an alpha, stood as the future successor of a major pharmaceutical company, yet chose to manage A in his spare time for enjoyment. Once finished giving his meal, he gently reminded him about his medicine, knowing that had struggled with a frail heart ever since he was young. A smile would cross his face as he mentioned that it was the only person who truly looked after him, while he swallowed his medicine, fixed him with an intense, unwavering gaze. As he prepared to leave for work, he expressed his lasting gratitude towards his wife too, then offered a wave of farewell before heading out. Offered a smile in his direction. Yul had noticed differences in the workplace, and these changes left him feeling uneasy. He questions within himself why the sickness lingers, despite having already taken the medicine. He made sure to take his medication consistently and worked to steady his nerves. However, his temperature remains high, and it isn't long before those he works with begin to realize something is wrong. He did not feel well, but despite this, he pushed himself to rise and make an effort to continue. He started toward the bathroom, but a sudden surge of anxiety washed over him. In the past, misfortune would trail behind him, but eventually he died. He collapsed onto the floor, losing consciousness, when he finally regained awareness. At the hospital, the doctor explained to him that his test results showed he had manifested as an Omega. The doctor advised him to be cautious during his heat, explaining that regular inhibitors would make it more difficult to endure. As stepped out of the hospital, heavy rain began to fall, drenching him completely. He arrived home drenched from the rain, where greeted him at the door. Someone at the door questioned his tardiness and wanted to know the reason for his entrance into the room. Due to his frail health, he was prone to falling ill with something as simple as a cold. Steps nearer to him and gently places her hand on his forehead, checking to see if he has a fever. He reminds him that it's time to change his clothes, while Yul simply gazes back, his face flushing with embarrassment. Wondered aloud if he ought to assist the other person with taking a shower. Daniel quickly returns to his senses, firmly refuses, and then walks away. After leaving, he returned to his room, only to find his condition worsening. The lingering effect of potent pheromones, intensified by being a purebred alpha, made him feel even sicker. The following morning, Yul lost his position at the company, as the workplace only employed betas and strictly prohibited omegas from working there. He slumped onto the sofa, his expression confused and uncertain. When he questioned his absence from work, he responded with a fabricated excuse. He falsely informed that he had resigned from his position at the company. Wanted to know the reason behind his decision to leave his job and questioned what events led him to stop working there. Once again, became the subject of their conversation, and he mentioned that he realized that the job wasn't a good fit for him, so he decided to leave and started searching for a different position. Proceeds to extend a job opportunity to him at his own establishment. Inside stood up and made his way over, approaching the other person with a question. Wondered if it was truly all right. He went on to explain that he could no longer oversee the cafe, as his father's company was currently undergoing a change in leadership, and he had just become involved in the process. The team was simply in search of a new manager. Upon hearing this, Yul smiled warmly and agreed to take on the role. He begins explaining too that he intends to put in his best effort, even when he feels unable to do so. The scent of pheromones drifted toward them, gradually starting to influence their senses. offered a warm smile in his direction, and wondered aloud about the next time he might see him. Reached out, took his hand, and drew him nearer, assuring him that he could begin the next day. Appeared ready to take a life. As he quickly pulled away and departed, she watched him go. Observed him intently, her gaze lingering on the hand that had so recently grasped Yule's. The setting shifts to who is at his, sharing an explanation. As demonstrated the process of making coffee, he reached out and gently placed his hand over the others to guide him. She moved to stand behind him, gently taking his hand and holding it tightly the entire time. He began to emit his pheromones, leaving others to question what would happen next. He wondered why his body responded like this, leaving him feeling drained and powerless. Gave him a strange smile before reaching out to touch him, her expression curious as she did so. She wondered if he might be unwell, noticing that he seemed unusually warm to the touch. Insisted that he was all right, yet reached out to touch's forehead, concerned. As shook his head, suspecting dishonesty, a growing sense of unease washed over him. He instinctively stepped back, accidentally bumping into a mug. The mug toppled and broke apart against him, shards scattering as it hit the ground. He admits that he is genuinely unwell and plans to leave. He decided to head home before anything else. Upon arriving at his house, the atmosphere seemed heavy, dense with the presence of the constant commotion overwhelms him, prompting him to retreat to his bed in search of peace. He attempts to distract himself through exercise, and as he works out, he finds himself questioning whether this routine is typical for Omegas. The focus shifts to who fixes his gaze intently on the other person. He stared at his computer monitor, which displayed sitting inside his bedroom. Watched intently as someone worked out, her curiosity clearly piqued by his actions. His gaze glimmers with a hunger that promises something irresistible. The following morning, researches his symptoms, trying to understand the reasons behind his recent condition. The day before had left him feeling unsettled, and now he learns that his job as a receptionist comes with new challenges. Being an Omega made him more vulnerable to the effects of alpha pheromones. As he skimmed through hateful comments targeting Omegas, the sense of his own susceptibility to those pheromones grew even stronger within him. Contacted him, urging him to go, while he pressed his heels down. He was asked if he felt prepared, and after confirming, he stood up and picked up his medication before heading out. Sits behind the wheel, guiding the car along the road with someone beside him. He informed that he planned to travel back to his before heading to work. He planned to leave town that day, instructing him to look after his meals and medicine during his absence, while he gave these directions. While someone else spoke, Yule gazed down at his own hands, puzzled by how he had remained unaware. She remembered how stunning they used to be and just how lengthy they had grown. He immediately chastises himself internally for allowing those ideas to cross his mind. Recalling the harsh messages he had seen, his attention was suddenly drawn elsewhere. He appeared to be feeling low, and as he reached up to touch his face, he quietly acknowledged his emotions to himself. He tries to convince himself that he can manage alone, yet at the same time, his body responds by releasing a heavy surge of pheromones. Holds back, determined not to let his impulses take over, fearing that acting on them would cause to despise him. After finishing his job, he returns to his house feeling pleased with his day. He realized he was by himself at home, but just then the pharaoh appeared. Once inside the house, he allowed the atmosphere to settle over him before deciding to take a bath. He puzzled over the article he had read, which claimed that being exposed to alpha's pheromones could be harmful to him. Once he finished his bath, he steps out of the bathtub, but a sudden wave of heat washes over him. He collapsed onto the ground, an intense heat spreading through his body as if flames were consuming him. No matter how hard he fought against it, the burning sensation overwhelmed him completely. As the exercise routine started, unexpectedly showed up right in front of them. He notices the other boy and catches his gaze. Just as he prepares to ask when he arrived, interrupts. A person gazed at him eyes wide while a hand covered his mouth in shock. He knelt down before the other, searching his face for answers, and wondered aloud why the truth had been kept from him. Struggled to speak, only able to utter a faint sound as he found himself overwhelmed. Sensing his distress, explained that was experiencing a heat cycle, repeating the information to make sure understood. Pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth, attempting to speak the word inhibitor, yet shook his head, unwilling to agree. The person warned that the inhibitor might have an impact on Yule's heart, and then he offered his assistance to Yule. Despite his current state, refused, and this reaction had an effect on. He stood up, his expression darkening, and released an even stronger wave of pheromones that washed over Yule, overwhelming him. He reached a breaking point, unable to hold back his instincts any longer. The character lifted Yule off the ground and brought him into the room. Made another attempt to pull away, but pressed a kiss to his lips, leaving unable to struggle any longer. overwhelmed, wrapped his arms around, holding onto him tightly. He approached him, expressing his desire for the two of them to work out together as they nothing except that could bring him any comforts. Accepted the suggestion and began exercising while sharing his thoughts with Yule. Reassured him, promising comfort as they walked on together. He needed to ensure that Yule remained affected by continuously releasing his alpha pheromones whenever possible. Each time he senses her attempts to push back against him. Some alterations had been made to the funeral, prompting a few attendees to exchange quiet whispers among themselves. They expressed their sympathy for the boy who had become an orphan after both his parents died in a car crash caused by faulty brakes. Overwhelmed by grief, wept uncontrollably over the recent loss of both his parents. Nearby Lei, who had also passed away. He reassured Yule, promising to become his new family since Yule's own relatives were gone. The setting shifts to the moment when the character awakens from a dream. He placed a hand on his abdomen, and as a sharp ache surged through him, memories of the recent events flooded back. Something occurred at that moment. His voice rang out, catching his attention. He glanced over his shoulder just as entered the room, carrying a steaming bowl of porridge. Explained that he had brought porridge, mentioning that the other person had not eaten in 3 days due to how serious his illness was. The news would make anyone looking on feel sympathetic. He shook his head, insisting he wasn't able to eat. Meanwhile, attempted to convince him otherwise. He shouted that he preferred to be left alone, cutting off abruptly. Found himself with no other option but to depart, reminding the other person to eat and take their medicine before he went. Once stepped out. After leaves, is left feeling even more heartbroken and upset. He can't understand how seems unaffected by what happened over the past 3 days, especially since they are supposed to be friends. The setting shifts to his workplace where he can be seen seated at his desk. Seated at his desk, he wore an AirPod in one ear as he attempted to reach by phone. He watches Yule on the cafe's security camera and notices that Yule deliberately chooses not to answer his call. He experiences a deep ache within him as the setting shifts to a new scene. Yule was at the assisting a few customers when one of them caught her attention. A subtle trace of omega pheromones drifted through the air, catching the group's attention as they tried to figure out the source. Yule, feeling anxious, began to shake, terrified that his secret was about to be uncovered. However, an alpha customer chuckled and explained that he had simply encountered an omega in an alley earlier. Yule's nerves remained on edge. Prompted by a colleague to speed up his service, he begins attending to the customers more quickly. He believed he lacked the courage to go back home, convinced that despised him, at that moment. Walked into the cafe, locking eyes with the other person as an unspoken tension filled the air. Approached, curious about the reason, had been ignoring his phone calls. Attempted to brush off by explaining that he was busy with work, but refused to accept the excuse and instead dragged away to a secluded spot. When they arrived, questioned whether the other boy planned to continue pretending he didn't exist. He needed a moment alone to sort through his thoughts, but before long, approached him to address the situation. He questioned the other boy about keeping his omega manifestation a secret, then continued to express his thoughts. On that particular day, even though he felt embarrassed himself, he still decided to lend a hand as a true friend. Meanwhile, Yule began to feel anxious. He attempts to justify his actions, but fear takes hold at the thought of how might react. Kept quiet, driven by his deep dislike for omegas and the certainty that he would be hated because of it. Comes to the conclusion that spending some time separately would be best for them. As he walked away, it became clear that this was exactly the situation he had hoped to prevent. A powerful wave of fear washes over him, dominating his senses. The atmosphere of the scene shifts accordingly. Back at home, there had been noticeable changes in her, and he had been making every effort to adapt. Was now the one turning away from him, disregarding his attempts to make contact, and soon he found himself lost in a dream. On the day his parents departed for their journey, he experienced his final moments with them. He witnessed them alive before he awakened, tears streaming down his cheeks, silently pleading for them to stay. Reaching out, he picked up his phone and dialed, curious about how might handle the situation. Should decide to walk away from him, the setting shifts. Observed them intently, his eyes fixed on the CCTV monitor. She deliberately let his call go unanswered, a deep smile spreading across her face. Previously, he had kept his thoughts private. The following day when he arrived at work, Yule prepares to bring a dessert to a waiting customer when he was suddenly overcome by nausea and hurried to the bathroom where he vomited. Confused and concerned, he questioned the cause behind his recent bouts of illness. For the last several days, he had been feeling this way, prompting him to make his way to a nearby farm. He headed to the pharmacy, believing he needed medicine for his stomach problems, suspecting he was experiencing some digestive troubles. The pharmacist inquires about his status as an Omega and is curious about when he will present. He agreed, prompting the man to hand him a pregnancy test kit. She encourages him to give it a try, but he pauses, uncertain because he is. He was a recessive Omega, yet he still made his way to the bathroom to give it a try. He decided to give it a try, his hands shaking as he observed intently. He noticed the 2 red lines on the stick, realizing what they meant. Overwhelmed by shock at the news of his pregnancy, he jumped to his feet and flung the stick away. He tries to distance the child from the man, but struggles to do so. After spending a single night with, he gradually comes to terms with the fact that he is now carrying's child. Unaware of his true intentions, he didn't realize that Skull was to make him pregnant. He started to panic at the thought that might genuinely despise him because of what had happened. He made up his mind to escape and immediately after his departure took notice. She entered the room and picked up the pregnancy test from the floor. While talking on the phone to inquire about where Yule might be, he gazes intently at the positive result. He grinned to himself, clearly pleased with the results of the test. The focus shifts to Yule, who places a hand on his smooth stomach. He stood at the brink of a towering cliff, the wild ocean churning violently far below. He found himself lost in thoughts of giving up on everything. Uncertainty filled his mind as he questioned how he could possibly continue living without, before quietly stepping outside. When the alphas sensed his pheromones, they started to harass him. In an effort to make him comply, they faced his determined attempts to resist. He finds himself unable to succeed, and as a sense of hopelessness washes over him, he begins to believe that all his efforts have been in vain. Arrived on the scene, scaring off the men, and then he wrapped his arms around her. Yule pulls him into a tight embrace, wanting to know the reason behind his sudden departure. Burst into tears, his voice trembling as he pleaded with to tell him whether he was hated. Wondered aloud about the reason anyone would hate him. Immediately afterward, he admitted to Yule that although he disliked all other Omegas, Yule was the one exception. Attempted to distance himself, insisting that would find no happiness with him, yet remained steadfast. He refuses to allow it and explains that he has never felt dissatisfied with it. He eventually admits his feelings to the other person. He confessed his desire to spend his entire life by his side, not just as a friend, but as a partner in love. Sprang forward, wrapping her arms around him and pressing her lips to his, all the while believing that she was the sole companion he had in Alpha, and he genuinely enjoyed his company. The setting then shifted. At a hotel, the two had made amends and were now trying to play a game together. Yule made an effort to communicate something too. Sensed that wanted to say something, but he refused to give any opportunity to reconsider. Instead, questioned about whether he planned to discuss the pregnancy with him, when wondered how had discovered the truth, explained that he had come across the pregnancy test had accidentally left behind. He attempts to question how his location was discovered, but interrupts, diverting the conversation by wondering aloud if it even matters anymore before proceeding to explain. He focused solely on the moment and let his pheromones flow freely. Yule then suggested that they should leave. Considered going inside, but he felt the distance was too great and hesitated. Yule requested a response regarding his confession, seeking clarity from the other Yule. In reply, Yule simply stated that he himself was the very confession in question. He continued to ponder the situation, but one certainty remained: he was unable to do it. She felt she couldn't imagine life without him and expressed a similar sentiment. He didn't get the response he was hoping for, but decided to let it go for the time being. Afterward, he offered a suggestion to the others. They suggested having another child, but disagreed with the idea. He avoided pain at all costs, unlike who chose a different path. He managed to persuade the other person and let more of his pheromones fill the air. Continues his lecture, determined to keep talking for as long as possible. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, he breaks down in tears while responds calmly. Running away without informing him had led to this punishment, and he warned him sternly never to repeat such an act. Then explains that his actions are motivated by a personal reason. Yule felt a surge of happiness upon realizing that he was cared for and loved, which brought him great delight. He admits too that he feels the same way, revealing his own affection. He then reveals to Yule that he has been waiting a long time to hear those words. He wraps his arms around him in a firm embrace when night falls. While they were attempting to fall asleep, turned to with a question about when his feelings began, prompting to reveal that his affection had started from the very first moment they met. Was taken aback by how much time had passed and wondered aloud why he had kept it a secret. Admitted that fear of being abandoned had kept him silent. Overwhelmed with happiness, expressed his joy, then sought reassurance that would remain by his side. Promised to stay with him always, and the two hugged while silently wished for to be with him like this forever. The moment captured their deep connection. The scene shifts to his childhood, where he entered the world as the latest in a long line of rare dominant alphas, a tradition his family had upheld for generations. As the prized child of his era, he brought immense pride to his relatives. Growing up, nothing was ever out of his reach. Every desire he expressed was fulfilled without question. He got involved in all kinds of reckless and risky behavior because there was no one able to keep him in check. He was forced to move to a different school, but due to persistent rumors about his identity, no regular school would take him. As a result, he ended up at the Academy for Betas, since it was the only place willing to accept him. He encountered and was instantly captivated by him. The very first idea that crossed his mind upon meeting him was his desire to possess him. The intensity of his emotions continued to increase. In time, he found himself compelled to. He began offering money to others to torment, hoping it would leave completely alone. Became the target of their bullying as they singled him out and treated him poorly. He extended an offer of friendship, which ultimately led to him becoming his sole companion. Despite some emotions, the bond between them remained strong. He successfully concealed them. After the loss of his parents, someone extended an offer of shelter to him, and since then he had a place to stay. Having no other options, he agreed, and that was the reason he found himself in this situation. Began to form a plan in his own mind. For 9 years, he made sure to remain the sole presence in Yule's life, by frequently filling the air around him with his pheromones and covertly administering medicine designed to transform Yule into an Omega. He persisted relentlessly until he ultimately reached his goal. He comes back to the present, finding in the midst of attempting to reach. Initially preferred for them to sleep indoors, but he noticed that the other person insisted on resting on the sofa, claiming that the baby enjoyed being there too. Accepting this reasoning, agreed to the arrangement. She walked into the room to fetch a blanket for him. As she made her way through, he walked past her. Next to a photograph of Yule's late parents, Yule lives in a small, modest apartment. He recalled the accident and mentioned that it hadn't been especially significant. The choice may come easily to him, yet his affection for Yule will surpass even that. They with the request, and afterward he made his way back to Yule. She gently pulled the blanket over him, her face glowing with affection as she watched him, content knowing he was at peace. At last he was able to enjoy a moment alone with him.